let's get started. If you had told me during episode 1, back in January 2023, that I'd be sitting here now, seeing things unfold the way that they have in my life, part of me might have believed you, given my past. But even so, I did everything in my power to keep this from happening again in my life. Let me explain. On July 31st, 2025, approximately a week before this recording, I presented this paper in my child and family counseling course at Lewis and Clark College while pursuing my MA. Just making sure that this is recording. It took me approximately 3 weeks to aggregate the information that I'm about to share with you about my personal life. I would be sitting in one of my classes during lecture and remember something else I had forgotten. I cried many times, breaking down sobbing while pacing around my home. As I read through everything that I am about to share, or as I read through everything that I'm about to share, everything that was expected of me during this assignment called My Family. Our assignment was to write a chronological timeline of the significant events in our lives and family history so far. That is what I am about to share with you. In addition, we were required to construct a genogram, which is essentially a family tree at least 3 generations above us, mapping out our family structure by birth, marriage, or commitment, and or adoption, and to include our communication patterns, deaths, estranged relationships, turbulent or high conflict relationships, occupational and academic information, mental health histories, substance abuse histories, and abuse and trauma histories. We were also to write a personal timeline narrative, as well as a personal reflection paper of our family life cycle, our family dynamics, and how the impact of our family history, life, and personal narrative will shape our work as therapists in training. I wasn't alone. Every single one of us in my cohort for professional mental health counseling, as well as the addiction cohort that I recently transferred out of, felt the same way. We were ultimately wiped out by the time we turned this in. Some of us had histories that only lasted 20 to 30 years, while others, like me, had almost twice the time. Not only were we living all of the trauma that we experienced, but then we were required to share our dirty laundry with our professors as well as our peers. So next to me is what I shared, which includes my genogram. And I don't expect you to be able to read it, but I brought it for visual purposes because we had to do a science fair share. And below my genogram are 4 patterns that run through my ancestry that I had to present to my peers and colleagues about. So that's what is over there. And I've been contemplating for probably like the last 2 to 3 months, but when I saw and knew and grasped what we were about to do, and I've just been sitting with it all semester, and I wanted to make a decision once I actually finished the project. But it's been a lot. And so I've been, like I said, contemplating whether or not it was worth it to share it with all of you. But I'm finally starting to understand why people see me as being so strong. Before I get started, I want you to know that this could be triggering for you. My goal is not for you to feel sorry for me, and I've learned by now in my life that no one is showing up to save me from this. I'm going to sneeze. Excuse me. Wow. Sorry for that, for whoever has headphones in. Anyways, I've learned by now in my life, weird timing, that no one is showing up to save me from this, although many have tried. I am not playing the victim. That is not my goal here, although I recognize I ultimately have been one. A pretty easy target, you could say. I want you to know that this isn't easy for me, and I make it very emotional. I am prepared for doing it with smiley affect too, but it's possible it might make me emotional. So I'm prepared for that. But I wanted to encapsulate this in time, and I really wanted you to see, whether you already follow me, whether you just found this random video on YouTube, whether you listen to me already or not, I wanted you to see how trauma manifests and impacts your life. And so I hope that this helps you in some way. This message is for you if you're the one who has been through enormous struggle, who's been through hardship. You don't allow your past to hold you back. You don't allow trauma to define you. You don't allow hardships to become your personality. And you don't play the victim. You're just different that way. You're born different, as am I. So no more secrets. It's time for us to transmute our collective pain. And that's why I'm here. It's fairly obvious to me that I'm a generational curse breaker. Are you? Maybe I'll never know or truly understand why these things have happened to me, specifically with the men in my life in this lifetime. I hope one day the truth is revealed to me, a deeper awareness or understanding of the spiritual lesson I was asking for at a soul level. All I can attribute this to is that I must have been a terrible person in my past life so I could experience it too. Let this be a reminder to choose love. Always choose love. Here's my story. I can trace the first cut of rejection back to when I was 7 years old. My best friend moved away, and it wasn't just losing a friend, it was losing my safe place. It was the first time I remember feeling abandoned, and it shifted something in me. I stopped letting people in so easily. I learned how to be present without being fully available, a kind of social anorexia. At home, love felt conditional and often critical. My grandmother would call my mother and sister fat, and though the words weren't always directed at me, they might as well have been. I learned that love could sting and that my worth could be picked apart. I was invisible in my own family. My mother controlled almost every part of my life, my education, my finances, my friendships. Independence wasn't something I was encouraged to have. In high school, I spent many lunches in the bathroom, avoiding the bullying that had already taught me how unsafe it was for me to be seen. Dating became another arena where rejection lived in the shadows. I often relied on my ability to persuade, to get people to stay close even when they didn't really want to. I confused convincing someone with being loved. My marriage was long, 19 years, but even then, rejection found its way in. We both brought our childhood wounds into that relationship. And because relationships have a way of holding up mirrors, the marriage triggered my deepest unresolved pain. It was a place where both my dreams and my worst nightmares lived side by side. After my marriage ended, I found myself in a relationship that lasted 2.5 years. We were emotionally close, physically connected, but he wouldn't commit. And so I waited, and I hoped. And I told myself that if I could just be patient enough, he would finally choose me. But he didn't. And when he did choose to finally commit to someone, it was to someone else. Even after that, I reached out with one last vulnerable message when I found out, a little while after that. And I said, sometimes I wish we could start over with what I know now. It wasn't a plea to him. It was just my truth at the time. And he didn't respond. And we have been pretty estranged ever since. And that silence wasn't new to me. It was a pattern that was consistent between the two of us, and a pattern that I've known since childhood, that the people that I most want to stay in my life were often the people who walked away from me. And that the men in my life have, for the most part, used me for my emotional labor, or leaned on me as both a financial and emotional resource, and then left for someone else. For years, I thought rejection meant I wasn't enough, that if I was prettier, funnier, smarter, calmer, less me, then maybe I would be chosen. But what I've come to see is that rejection often says more about the other person's readiness or their unhealed wounds than it does about my worth. So here is my timeline of events. 1973. I was born on November 6th at 2:11 p.m. at Hoag Hospital in Newport Beach, California. I am the youngest of 3 sisters, with siblings being 5 and 6 years older than me. I was the child they planned for. My father had hoped for a son and had chosen the name Nicholas, but when I arrived, Nicole became my middle name instead, and my mother got to choose my first name, and because I was a girl. And my father was at work. He was working as a policeman when I was born. So I grew up in Huntington Beach, California. My father held multiple roles throughout my childhood, including policeman, investigator, undercover DEA agent, and later deputy district attorney. My mother worked as a waitress, and during his years as an undercover agent, my father was often away for long stretches, and we were taught that, all 3 of us were taught that men could do dangerous things to us. We were taught to be hypervigilant in parking lots, to always be looking around us, and to be suspicious of everyone. That was also a time in history, especially in California, of a lot of serial killings. So anyways, that's kind of, I was raised with a lot of fear. My father participated in the intelligence efforts that ultimately led to Timothy Leary's second arrest and extradition from Algeria in the early 1970s. Our home was deeply conservative and religious. My mother practiced Christian Science, and our household operated under a strict Christian framework. I experienced physical, emotional, sexual, financial, and religious abuse throughout my upbringing. Checking Okay, good. Everything's recording. 1975. At 18 months, I nearly died from undiagnosed pneumonia, resulting in lifelong health conditions and complications such as asthma and severe allergies. My mother began insisting that our family turn away from any gatherings where someone might be ill, and she started vacuuming my room every day. As a family, we weren't allowed to have any animals at the time. It later changed, but yes. So 1976. When I was 3 years old, my closest sister encouraged me to lash out at a neighborhood boy during a disagreement. She actually said, sick him. I bit him and was too young to understand the consequences at the time. And this became my first memory of being spanked by my father. Years later, my sister admitted that she still carries the guilt for not taking responsibility and for lying about her role in what happened. The phrase, "wait till your father gets home," quickly becomes a fixture in our household. I remember being in constant fear and expecting punishment. I was actually terrified. I remember being terrified. We all were. My father would put us in a lineup when something had happened and investigate who and what happened. Yeah. So we had to line up against a wall, I remember. Either way, I got lost there for a second. Okay, yes, 1977. At age 4, my favorite grandmother, so my father's mother, passed away. And so to explain a little bit about that, I had no grandfathers present when I was born. One had died tragically. My mother's father died within 18 months, I believe, of my parents getting married. He was a carpenter. He helped build Treasure Island in Disneyland. And he was on the top of the building, and a crane knocked him off the building. So he died pretty tragically. And then my other grandfather was estranged from the family, left my grandmother to raise 3 boys in upstate New York because he didn't want any more children. And that was when she got pregnant with my dad. And so he grew up very poor. And I knew very little about that. We were just told that he was very poor. And my mom would slip in little stories about him starving or him not having shoes or them not having running water, and how grateful we should be for how hard he worked for us. So, okay, went on a tangent there. My grandmother dies, and I'm told by my other grandmother that I'll never see her again. And we weren't allowed to attend the funeral, so she just disappeared out of my life. And we didn't talk about her anymore. And my maternal grandmother just bought me a doll. She bought us each a doll. And yeah, then she told us we were never going to see her again. And that was my favorite grandma. It was all 3 of us. Yeah, we really liked her. Anyways, my family moved from Huntington Beach to a secluded custom home community of about 20 houses in San Juan Capistrano, 45 minutes south of Huntington Beach, seeking land for raising horses and other animals. There were only a few children in my neighborhood, but none my age. Mostly retirees occupied the households. On Wednesdays after school, my maternal grandmother would pick us up from school and watch us while my parents went out on a date night. 5 years ago, my sister admitted that my grandmother would often lock me in the bedroom unattended, leaving me to cry. My sisters would sit outside the door planning on how they would feed me or free me. I only remember having a hard time falling asleep at night and being afraid to be punished by her for consistently wetting the bed. She liked to spank me. I begged my parents to let me attend kindergarten so I could have someone my age to play with. I spent most of my recesses and lunches with my teachers whenever possible throughout all of elementary, especially after my sister left when I started first grade. She went into junior high, and so she's no longer in the school. I began hiding under the dining room table during family conflicts in my house, which were generally with my older two sisters. I would hide because there were chairs. And then my mom had a lace tablecloth always on that table. And so, to protect it. And so I would sit under there, and sometimes I would fall asleep, and everyone would be looking for me. But that was my spot. I was considered extremely shy. I would cry if an adult outside of my family or close family friends spoke to me. In 1978, at age 5, I was attacked by a neighbor's Great Dane, which knocked me down and put my head in its mouth. My sister, who was watching me, walked me home, and we waited for our mother to come home from work and take me to the ER. There, I received 22 stitches on my forehead under local anesthesia, as directed by my mother, with a plastic surgeon. And we waited for the plastic surgeon. And she asked me to lie still and remain quiet so the plastic surgeon could finish quickly. She actually pointed out a kid who was crying, and she said, "Can you hear them?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "If you lie still and you're quiet, he'll be able to do it faster." So, in my own family, if it wasn't obvious already, I endured bullying, physical abuse, and taunting from my siblings. They would regularly point at me repeatedly and call me a baby, daring me by saying, "Don't cry." I was given nicknames such as Presh for being precious, Sammy Siegel for my eyebrows, and Poop Eyes for my brown eyes because they both have blue. They also made up a song about my name and how my mother dressed me, and they would sing that repeatedly until I would cry. My parents would always downplay it, telling me I was too sensitive and to ignore them, teaching me things like sticks and stones will break their bones, but names will never hurt you. Anyways, sometimes they would even just be cracking up with them. My father would deliberately put raisins in my oatmeal. First of all, my food could not touch. It would make me cry. And my dad would put raisins in my oatmeal because he liked my reaction. And I would get really angry and tell him, "I hate raisins." And he thought that was hilarious and still does to this day. I'm not sure he's ever apologized. He still thinks it's hilarious. During recess and lunch, I often spent time with my teacher whenever I could. Looking back, I can see how the early trauma and CPTSD fed into what were later symptoms of undiagnosed neurodivergence, generalized anxiety disorder, social anxiety disorder, sensory processing disorder, selective mutism, misophonia, AFRID, brumotactilophobia, ADHD, and autism symptoms in my childhood. And yes, I just found out a lot of those things this past semester in my interventions for children and adolescents class. 1979. At age 6, I witnessed my sister's dog being viciously attacked by another neighborhood dog, and I watched it die in her arms. I also accidentally killed our pet duckling. Our rabbits kept dying from neglect, and we would discover their bodies buried in shallow graves in the horse corral while mucking the stalls. Our dog would repeatedly kill our chickens, and my father would hang the dead birds on its neck to deter it, which never worked, leaving them to rot for days. My sister gave me a second-degree burn with a curling iron on my back. And again, during recess and lunch, I often spent time with my teacher whenever I could. 1980. At age 7, my childhood best friend and their family, who had watched me after school, moved away to Northern California. My mother told me I would never see them again, which devastated me. I wanted the family to adopt me, and I was inconsolable when they left. John Lennon's death marked my first experience with global grief and its impact on the adults around me. My mother threw away my lifelong security blanket on trash day, telling me it was time for me to grow up, and later reflected that I was never the same after that particular year. My mother enrolled me in drama productions and a sewing group through 4-H, where she was a 4-H leader, and also had me model at fashion shows as a form of exposure therapy. My oldest sister, age 13, purposely slammed my hand in a door and begged me not to tell on her. She also started putting wet washcloths in the door jamb and locked me in my room whenever she was babysitting my sister and I. During recess and lunch, I often spent time with my teacher whenever I could. In 1981, at age 8, both of my sisters' truancy increases the family stress. And there are lots of verbal disagreements and a lot of violence. My oldest sister regularly would tell my mother how much she hated her. My mother would hit us regularly using a wooden spoon that left welts, or she would reach in the back seat of the car. And I would get hit a lot of the times because I sat in the middle of my two sisters. She would especially hit my oldest sister with a wooden spoon that had a circle in the middle, because it would leave welts on her legs. And she would chase her around the house. And my older sister would threaten to call child protective services on her, and my mother would laugh and say, "Go right ahead." At this time in my life, I'm being sexually abused, and my sister that is closest to my age finally caught it happening, and it stops. I would regularly stay behind or get lost at the mall or department store to see if my siblings or my mother would notice. My mother put a bar of soap in my mouth for talking back to her, and so I hid under my bed and wouldn't come out. My mother signed me up to become a cheerleader through Pop Warner football and had me join a traveling singing group, all to help me overcome my shyness. My 4th grade teacher visits our home and goes horseback riding with me due to her concern for my well-being. 1982, at age 8, I moved from a public to a private Christian school. I immediately became an outsider, teased for having a crush on a boy and being the new kid. My love letter to him is passed around the school during lunchtime. My mother consistently puts Tabasco sauce on my nails and cuticles so I won't bite them. I often felt intense loneliness, which my mother would frequently observe while sitting in her car during lunchtime.
I was unaware of her watching me sit alone at the picnic table until I was an adult. She created play dates with other reluctant children on my behalf. My mother struck my sister so hard that it ruptured her eardrum. When we went to the doctor, we were instructed to lie and told to say that it happened during my sister's gymnastics practice instead. 1983, my oldest sister nearly lost her life in a high-speed crash, missing a stoplight and racing her brand new Mustang into a light pole. She contracts a bunch of STDs and then, in addition, has an abortion. She is told she will never have children, none of which was ever spoken about in our family. I didn't learn the truth until my mother shared it with me, within the last 10 years, I want to say, when I was an adult and I was trying to get our gynecological medical history from my gynecologist, and that's how we got into that. I witnessed my father telling my oldest sister she is an embarrassment to our family. I distinctly remember where I was standing and where my sister was. Up until 5 years ago, my sister would call me drunk, crying about how we were all never loved for different reasons. My father regularly appeared on the 6 o'clock news, and a film was eventually made about one of his most well-known cases at the time, which was a 6-year-old named David Rothenberg. David's father abducted him under the guise of a trip to Disneyland, took him to a motel in Buena Park, which is in Orange County, drugged him with sleeping pills, and then set the room on fire while David slept, watching him from across the street as it burned. And David survived, although he suffered severe burns over 90% of his body, and he died pretty recently. But my dad became David's hero, and his mother's, and the public's. 1985, at age 12, I received my first dental filling without Novocaine. My mother told me the dentist would work faster if he knew I could feel it and was in pain. I was diagnosed with scoliosis and began wearing a back brace along with braces, neck gear, and glasses for nearsightedness. I confronted my mother and told her I was writing a book on how to not be a parent when I grew up. My mother pinched my cheeks and tugged on them to punish me since I was wearing braces. I finally made a best friend 1 grade below me, and I started spending time at her home regularly. I convinced my parents to sell their home so we could all live in the same housing community as my friend's family, and we moved from San Juan Capistrano, 30 minutes south, to Dana Point, on the headlands of the beach. My bedroom was in a loft with half walls, which meant I had no privacy or door, and shared a bathroom with my sisters, who were rarely home. Eventually, my dad extended the walls to full walls, but because the ceiling was so tall, I still didn't have a door, and it still didn't go all the way to the top. That was my agreement with them. I had to concede to having that room in order to be closer to my friend. But they did it. They did it for me. They knew I was fairly lonely. My older sister spends several nights in jail, once for drunken misconduct and another time for assault and battery. She broke a beer bottle over someone's head because of what the man said to her. My father, who is now a famous deputy district attorney and works on gang violence cases, intervenes and has her charges dropped. So now we're moving into my teens and early 20s. At age 13, I was intentionally isolated and forced to attend a Catholic high school located an hour away in a newly developed residential area, leaving me with no option but to focus solely on school for 10 hours a day. I made the competitive cheerleading team, the choir, and the mock trial team, but struggled with failing grades and repeating classes, which required me to receive tutoring throughout those years. My education in Catholic school exposed me to Buddhism, Jungian psychology, and world religions, which helped shape my spiritual identity. I began drinking alcohol with my best friend at our community pool. Midway through the year, at age 14, I lost my best friend when her parents divorced, and they could no longer afford for her to attend my school. I also didn't make the cheerleading team and had to watch from the sidelines as they competed or performed without me. Bullied by several male peers I showed interest in, I often hid in the bathroom during lunch to avoid one particular peer who would mock me loudly in front of others. Through my mother's relentless determination for me to stay competitive, I spent the entire year training in ballet, jazz, and gymnastics, preparing myself to make the cheerleading team the following year. At age 15, I recognized my bisexuality, often finding myself staring at fellow cheerleaders while undressing for PE. My closest sister became pregnant by her abusive, addicted boyfriend, who was also a cocaine dealer. She kept it a secret from my parents for the first trimester, and I didn't learn about it until the third trimester, when I asked my mom why my sister had gained so much weight. My father stopped speaking to her for several months and then forced her to marry him. At age 16, my sister and her son moved back in with us, and my father threatened her husband's life after regularly finding unexplained bruises all over her body and black eyes. My mother would hand me the car keys regularly and instruct me to attend parties she had heard about during carpool. I fell on my face while attempting a back handspring back tuck without a spotter and sustained what is considered a whiplash injury, which went unnoticed until I was 28, and it now causes me constant chronic pain. I gave myself alcohol poisoning for the first time in front of a friend's family on New Year's Eve. I finally have my first boyfriend, who my mother wants me to have, and whenever he comes over, both my sisters relentlessly tease him. My father runs for Orange County District Attorney, and we are forced to support and work for him throughout his campaign. At age 17, on my first day of college, I was sexually assaulted by someone I had met during summer orientation. I never told my parents, afraid that they would force me to return home and give up my independence. Tightening their control once I even left home, they took away my car, prohibited me from working, and insisted I rely entirely on the money they provided so I could focus on school. They began showing up for unannounced visits. My mother would often break down crying in public places, distressed that I had moved out. My father would tell me to stop upsetting her, insisting I return home and accusing me of tearing our family apart and breaking her heart. To this day, my mother still says, "Well, you're the one who moved." Feeling trapped, unsupported, and emotionally overwhelmed, I began using marijuana and frequently drank to the point of blacking out. At age 18, I fall in love for the first time and eventually have an abortion without informing my parents, fearing I would be forced to return home. Following the suggestion of my best friend and roommate, I began recreationally using illegal street drugs and attending raves in San Francisco to cope with my severe depression.
I started attending free therapy through Jewish family services after having repeated nightmares and flashbacks involving my mother. I was advised to get a depression screening test at a psychiatric hospital. I was told I would most likely live with mild depression for the rest of my life. At the age of 19, I moved in with my boyfriend and became estranged from my family as a result of my decision. At age 20, I went through a breakup and betrayal trauma. My boyfriend quit his job, asked me to support him while he opened a pizza restaurant with his best friend, and then broke up with me to start seeing someone he had hired. After several months of living together post-breakup, with no financial means to leave, I turned to my mother for help and moved back home to the toxic family environment I had once escaped. As I was moving out, my mother publicly shamed me in front of my neighbors and our family, saying, "I told you he never loved you." I battled chronic depression, suicidal ideation, continued anorexia nervosa, and attempted suicide. At the age of 21, I moved from Southern California to Northern California to complete my college education. For 6 months, I shared a room and slept on the floor of my roommate's bedroom, attending college without any financial or emotional support from my parents. They both told me I would fail without their help. I continued to sleep with my ex-boyfriend periodically while he lives with his new girlfriend in an attempt to win him back. And the following year, he marries her and has 2 kids. Early adulthood and career. At 23, I graduated with a BA in creative writing from Sonoma State University and moved to San Francisco after spending 6 months of living out of my car. I found work as an administrative assistant at a tech company, and during that time, an unplanned pregnancy arose from a casual friendship. When I decided to keep the baby, my mother stopped speaking to me and enlisted other family members to pressure me into placing my daughter up for adoption. During my second trimester, the biological father sent a letter saying, "Blood is just blood," and that he viewed himself more as a distant uncle. He told me he would always be listed in the phone book, and then he disappeared from my life entirely. In my third trimester, my mother called me tattooed, blued, and screwed in front of my 8-year-old nephew, which she informed me is a derogatory military term used to demean women seen as promiscuous and rebellious, especially those with tattoos like mine. My roommate told me I had to move out because of my pregnancy. At age 24, I became a single mother with minimal support from my family. I actually birthed her myself. My best friend at the time was there at the very end of her birth. But yeah, I went through transition and was at the hospital by myself. Either way, I had to ask my father for permission to move back home with my daughter after they were born. And he agreed, but only on the condition that I do their housework and cook for them. Once I moved in, I asked my father if he was proud of me, and he said he was proud that I graduated from high school. I broke down, and he subsequently cried for 3 days. My mother told me I should be ashamed of myself, saying she hadn't seen him cry like that since his brother's funeral. I disclosed my bisexual identity to my mother, and she minimized it by saying that all women have crushes on their friends, even her. I began working as a waitress and substitute teacher to build financial independence while my mother babysat. I entered into an engagement with a romantic partner. After being introduced to his family, he ended the relationship, citing concerns around my being emotionally abusive, and requested the return of his engagement ring. And my mother responded with anger, telling me I fucked it up and blaming me for the relationship's end. And so I told her if she liked him so much, she should marry him. At the age of 25, I became a tenant in one of my parents' rental properties, sharing the space with a friend and paying rent. I slept with an acquaintance of a childhood friend to help him move me from my parents' home in Southern California to Northern California. And I moved in temporarily with a friend from college and began working as a substitute teacher again, and eventually earned my emergency teaching credential. With her help, I was hired to teach my own third grade classroom at her school. At the age of 26, not being able to cover expenses and being about $8,000 in debt, which I thought was astronomical at the time, I worked as an exotic dancer while also teaching third grade. I met my ex-husband during this time at the club where I was employed. He persuaded me to quit both jobs and go back to being an executive assistant. After he divorced his wife, we have an open relationship as swingers in the lifestyle. At 27, my daughter and I moved in with my husband. He insisted we split every expense 50-50 because he wanted me to pull my weight. For the first year, she wasn't allowed to have her own room. Her space was taken by the dining room furniture because he considered it his dining room, which I eventually had to pay to store the furniture before I could make it her bedroom. I also wasn't allowed to do all kinds of things to that house, like even hang a picture on the wall. But that's just how things were, or what I thought it was worth at the time. I would lay her crib mattress on the floor and tucked it away in a closet. That's what he wanted me to do during the day. And over time, my daughter grew deeply depressed and stopped speaking. Or stopped making effort to communicate. She eventually went to speech therapy. At age 28, I went back to working nights as an exotic dancer and received my first DUI after falling asleep at the wheel driving home from the club. I became certified as a personal trainer and began working at 24-Hour Fitness. A chiropractor discovered 3 bone spurs in my neck from the injury I sustained at 16, which now causes me constant chronic pain. At 29, I learned after the fact that my father had been diagnosed with stage 4 lymphoma. My parents had kept it from me until he was diagnosed and was receiving chemotherapy. He survived, but I watched my mother criticize him during his recovery, calling him lazy and accusing him of giving up on his life whenever he would rest. I began studying the work of Rudolf Steiner and enrolled in a Waldorf high school teacher training program. After completing the program, I was unable to secure a teaching position in my area, and my husband was unwilling to relocate. So instead, I launched a personal training business with a close friend and business partner. At age 30, I eloped with my husband at a swingers event after my mother's persistent pressure to design my wedding dress for me and his mother's repeated requests to change our wedding date to avoid conflicting with her golf vacation in Hilton Head. At age 32, my husband asked me to dissolve my personal training company and go back to work as an executive assistant. My aunt was murdered by her tenant after going missing from her Orange County home. Her remains were later found buried in the San Bernardino Mountains, and her murderer was sentenced to 25 years to life. We've had four of these kinds of major deaths in my family, or extended family, I should say, extended family. At age 33, I started taking antidepressants and began seeing a psychologist for depression and severe anxiety. Every 2 weeks, I flew from Northern California to Las Vegas, Nevada to work weekends as an exotic dancer, while also holding a full-time position as an executive assistant. My ex-husband falls in love with an exotic dancer and stops sleeping with me. Adulthood and family dynamics. At 34, after learning his name from me, my daughter found their biological father online and wrote him a heartfelt letter. He responded, reached out to us, and even arranged for our families to meet, he and his wife and the three of us. He also initiated the legal process for my husband at the time to adopt our daughter. But just as the meeting was about to happen, he abruptly canceled and disappeared again from our lives. At 35, I lost my job due to the economic downturn and had to ask my father for a loan to pay off my credit card. Frustrated by my finances, my husband fell in love with another exotic dancer. In response, I turned to heavy drinking and smoking marijuana. I began experiencing nervous breakdowns, panic attacks, and suicidal ideation, which led us to decide to close our relationship and try monogamy. At my insistence, we saw couples counseling, and I also started seeing an individual therapist. At 36, I discovered my husband was having an affair while our home was listed to sell during the economic downturn. My daughter and I temporarily relocated to Portland, Oregon, which is where I am now, staying with a college friend. We returned when an unexpected offer came through on our house. We immediately rolled into a contract on a condo in San Francisco so my husband could be closer to work. After the move, my daughter began showing signs of severe depression and suicidal ideation. At the age of 37, my mother remarked in front of my husband, "I don't know where you come from," referring to me. That comment solidified my husband's decision to sever ties with my family permanently, and he refused to visit them again, encouraging me to do the same. At 38, my favorite cousin, who was gay and never accepted by our families, who was more like a brother to me than anything, fell down the stairs and was in a coma for several months. Once out of the hospital, he eventually died from complications surrounding alcohol and opioid addiction. I was incarcerated for a second DUI. With 2 strikes against me, I received the maximum penalty, which included jail time, fines, sheriff's fees, DUI education, the ignition interlock device program, mandatory counseling, and participation in a sheriff's work project, which broke me open. When I came home from jail, my husband threatened my life. He stopped speaking to me for several months, and he told me that if I ever made this mistake again, he would buy a shotgun and shoot me himself. He sold my car, or pressured me to sell my car, and refused to install the ignition interlock device in his, leaving me without transportation for 3 years. The state of Oregon eventually forgave me after fulfilling the rest of my sentencing, and I regained my license shortly after moving here in 2014. During this period, my husband fell in love with a webcam model and asked to stay with her for 2 weeks in Brazil. When I threatened to leave the relationship, he told me to go fuck myself in front of my daughter. At 39, I was diagnosed with Graves' disease. My husband fell in love with another woman. We were both seeing her at the same time. I initiated a conversation about relocating to Portland to heal myself, then called our realtor and began the process of listing our house for sale. I filed for divorce in secret and had a consultation with an attorney. In 2014, at age 40, I moved to Portland, Oregon with my daughter and began a deep journey into trauma healing and spiritual study, eventually becoming a Reiki master and immersing myself in the studies of the shamanic wheel with Rising Fire here in Portland. I withdrew the divorce petition before it ever was served and admitted everything to my husband in an effort to get him back. In an attempt to reconnect, we attended a couple's imago therapy weekend intensive on a Caribbean island. My husband began commuting between Portland and San Francisco, spending 4 days in each city. He leased a high-rise apartment in a new development south of Market Street in San Francisco. He started seeing a 22-year-old girlfriend without my consent and knowledge. Another cousin from the same extended family passed away due to a heroin overdose. In 2019, at age 46, my husband relocated to Portland full-time and used our shared retirement funds to purchase 4 commercial real estate properties, launching his own commercial real estate company here in Portland, Oregon. And I officially began my business as a psychic cheerleader. Here are the most significant moments from my most recent years. In January 2021, my sister joined me and my ex-husband on a vacation. And late one night, once he had gone to bed, we sat near a fire pit and talked. She remembered being 4 or 5 and my mother running out of gas in the rain. My oldest sister must have been with them, because my mom opened her coat and tucked my sister inside and carried her all the way home. She could hear my mom's heart pounding and feel her labored breathing. And then my sister says through the tears, that was the only time I remember her carrying me. And the only time I ever felt loved in my entire life. She looked at me and added, I don't even know what love is, and I don't think you do either. And I think she was right. In my relationships, I'd only been with men who had loved me in a way that kept me at a distance, just enough to keep me hoping for one day while feeling alone in the present. I tolerated so much, mistaking scarcity for love. September 2021. At my sister-in-law's 3rd wedding, my daughter and I stood together watching my mother-in-law verbally abuse my father-in-law in front of us. And my daughter turned to me and said, "Hey, Mom, that's your future." And I said, "No, it's not. Fuck you." And in that moment, it hit me. I had to leave him. And so just maybe a week later than that, after one final argument about how my daughter and I weren't contributing enough financially and how he was tired of taking care of us, I told him it was over. And I was terrified. My attorney at the time, I remember, said, "Are you afraid that he's going to hurt you physically?" And I said, "No. It's much more malicious than that. He's probably been planning it already, and he's one step ahead of us. And we're fighting an invisible war, something that he's already planned and will continue to unveil over time. And he's proven me right." We'll get to that. So in October 2021, I filed for divorce. And almost immediately after, I entered a relationship with a man who has 3 children. And we call each other best friends. In March of 2022, I went through a 3-day trial with 10 witnesses, resulting in over $300,000 spent on an attorney and consultant fees throughout the divorce. In October of 2022, I have a major fallout due to the betrayal and lost my friendship and relationship with a best friend and business partner at the time. In June 2023, I attended my prerequisites for an MA at Portland State University. I applied to Mental Health and Addiction of Oregon and became a program navigator for Clackamas County. And I became a certified peer support specialist. In August 2023, my divorce was finalized. In October 2023, my ex-husband filed an appeal in the appellate court to contest the divorce ruling, which is still ongoing. In November 2023, I moved in with my new partner who insisted we were just friends and his 3 children. And we agreed I would set up my bedroom furniture in his spare room so we could both have enough space. In January 2024, my daughter, now 28, moved from Portland, Oregon, in my home to Los Angeles to create more autonomy and avoid future enmeshment. In February of 2024, a friend moves out of the country and my best friend disappears completely into her intimate partnership, eventually selling her house and moving. And I have a major falling out with another close friend. In March of 2025, after we returned from a vacation celebrating his birthday with friends, my partner asked me to move out, or the person I was seeing asked me to move out of his house. I moved my bedroom furniture and belongings back to my place. And when I asked if this meant we were ending things, he said, "That's not what I'm saying at all." I found myself grappling with solitude, compounded grief, and a complete reevaluation of my identity, alongside suicidal ideation, anorexia, and severe depression. During this time, I was also diagnosed with another autoimmune condition called inverse psoriasis. I had lost everything, and for the first time in my life, sat alone in an empty house with no one to turn to except my daughter. I made the decision to begin therapy. May 2025. That was the last time I saw his 2 youngest children. After acceptance, I prepared myself for graduate studies beginning last fall in counseling and addictions at Lewis and Clark College. I also became a substance abuse prevention specialist and began participating in the Communities That Care Advocacy Coalition. I left my job at Mental Health and Addiction of Oregon, and I traveled to Fiji alone on a vacation I had planned with my partner. In June of 2025, I had dinner and saw my partner a couple more times. In July of 2024, my partner tells me he wants to sever any connection between us that would allow him to start seeing someone else. My best friend from college, who I had lost touch with maybe 5 or 6 years, sent me $1 on Venmo as a way to reconnect with me. And we decided to book my bucket list trip to Sardinia, Italy together. And while we're there, I purchased a 2-bedroom apartment. My ex-husband filed a supersedes to place a hold on the award for my attorney fees case that I won, as well as our retirement, which our quadro attorneys had already split. In September of 2024 was the last time I saw my partner's oldest son and the last time I had dinner at his home. And then I became a full-time grad student. In October of 2024, after I threatened to share my chapter in the Amazon bestseller, The Art and Truth of Transformation for Women, where I revealed intimate details of our life in San Francisco and my reasons for moving to Portland and changing my life, with all of my ex-husband's relatives and friends in order to push him to resolve our shared assets, his lawyers instructed me to never contact him again except through my attorney. In December of 2024, while helping my daughter move into a new apartment, I received a text message from my partner telling me he had started seeing someone else. At the same time, my mother and father were arguing with me out on the lawn, and we have not really had a relationship since. Both my partner as well as my parents. January 2025, I founded the House of Healing and Love and now serve on Tiger Turns the Tide as a board member. The next section is my personal timeline narrative outlining the key events and experiences that have shaped my life. I was born on November 6, 1973 at 211 Newport Beach, California, the youngest of 3 daughters. My birth was the only one planned. My father had hoped for a son and had chosen the name Nicholas. When I was born, my father was not present at my birth, and Nicole became my middle name instead. My childhood was shaped by a conservative Christian household led by a mother who practiced Christian Science and a father who worked in law enforcement, first as a police officer, then as an undercover DEA agent, and later as a deputy district attorney. My upbringing was marked by physical, emotional, sexual, financial, and religious abuse. From an early age, I experienced medical trauma, nearly dying of pneumonia at 18 months, and emotional abandonment and neglect, particularly after my mother discarded my security blanket at age 7. This moment in my life created an emotional rupture and marked the beginning of my internalized shame and loss of safety. I became even more withdrawn, anxious, and hypervigilant. I struggled with sensory sensitivities and social anxiety that would later align with traits of undiagnosed neurodivergence, CPTSD, ADHD, anxiety, and sensory processing disorders, and autism traits. My school years were marked by selective mutism, bullying, and a deep desire for connection. Teachers, neighbors, and animals became my safety. Home life was often chaotic and unpredictable, filled with sibling violence and parental emotional volatility. At age 8, my mother's physical abuse ruptured my sister's eardrum, and we were told to lie to the doctor. These experiences embedded in me a persistent and deep mistrust of authority, as well as survival-based understanding of both loyalty and secrecy. In adolescence, I was sent to an isolated Catholic high school, which removed me from friends and familiar environments. I was exposed to world religions, Jungian psychology, and Buddhism, which confirmed that people around the world thought and believed differently than how I was raised. I became aware of my bisexuality, a realization that I kept private for fear of my family's judgment. My mother later dismissed and minimized it, saying all women have crushes on their girlfriends. She now gaslights my daughter, telling them I am gay. My college experience, 8 hours from home, began with trauma. On the first day, I was raped by somebody I had met during summer orientation. I told my roommates only, fearing my parents would make me come back home. My autonomy had already been erased. My parents kept my car, prohibited me from working, and pressured me to conform to their version of academic success. Their regularly unannounced visits and emotional manipulation led me to alcohol, marijuana, LSD, mushrooms, and ecstasy as I struggled to escape my reality, self-regulate, understand, or numb my pain. In my early 20s, I became pregnant from a casual friendship. I chose to keep the baby. I'm really glad I did. My mother stopped speaking to me and enlisted our family to pressure me into adoption. My daughter's biological father wrote me to say he saw himself as a distant uncle and then disappeared. Despite the lack of support, I gave birth to my daughter and returned to my parents' home, where I was offered conditional housing in exchange for domestic labor. The misery of these years, coupled with rejection, depression, and financial instability, resulted in substance use, suicidality, and disordered eating. However, I kept going. Motherhood gave my life structure, responsibility, and meaning. Even as I juggled multiple roles to financially support us, waitressing, substitute teaching, third grade teaching, exotic dancer, nude and erotic model, personal trainer, and eventually becoming an executive or personal assistant. I met my ex-husband the day before my daughter's second birthday at the gentleman's club I was working at. What began as a seemingly stable relationship evolved into a 22-year trauma-bonded relationship and then marriage. It included financial control, betrayal, polyamory, infidelity, and cycles of psychological abuse. I filed for divorce twice, but didn't finalize it until 2023. My daughter, now 27, witnessed most of the addiction and trauma, and their journey with mental health has become a reflection of my lack of early awareness and our combined generational trauma. They do not have a relationship with my ex-husband or their biological father, as neither man has made an effort to be a part of their life or mine. I moved to Portland with my daughter in 2014 to begin again. I became a Reiki master, studied the shamanic wheel, and began deep trauma and spiritual work after experiencing incarceration, autoimmune disease, and multiple compounded grief events, in addition to the deaths of close family members and cousins to overdose and the murder of my aunt. Each loss deepened my understanding of despair, grief, and loss, as well as the need for continued healing. Additionally, I pursued the Landmark Forum, as well as a trauma psychology intensive to further my personal transformation. Recent years have brought me more solitude, but also enhanced clarity. I've left toxic jobs, grieved friendships and intimate partnerships, released old beliefs and patterns, and stepped into leadership roles. In pursuing my graduate degree, my lived experiences gives me rare insight into trauma, attachment, betrayal, and resilience, as well as high conflict personalities. I have founded the House of Healing and Love and am committed to building spaces that integrate embodied healing, narrative repair, and soul-centered therapeutic work. My timeline is a journey of survival, transformation, and the possibility of alchemizing my pain into purpose. I'm very proud of everything I have accomplished and overcome in this lifetime. And it is very clear to me that this is why I do the work that I do. It's my calling. When I step back and look at the threads running through my story, I see how each of these patterns, generational silence and secrecy, emotional parentification, religious shame and rigidity, and chronic betrayal, is the soil that I grew up in. It taught me early on that my voice was dangerous, my needs were secondary, my body and choices didn't fully belong to me, and that trust could disappear without warning. That's the thing about rejection. It's not always one big moment. Sometimes it's 1,000 tiny ones that train your nervous system to expect loss, dismissal, and abandonment. And when that conditioning is left unexamined, it doesn't just stay in the past. It follows you into friendships, work, and especially into love. But here's what I know now. Patterns are not prisons. Every time I name what happened instead of hiding it, I weakened the grip of secrecy. Every time I honor my own needs before rushing in to save someone else, I rewrite the parentification script. Every time I refuse to carry shame for my spirituality, my identity, or my body, I loosen the chains of moral rigidity. And every time I choose to risk connection, even after betrayal, I remind myself that rejection is not the final word. You might be listening or watching and seeing your own story in some of mine. Maybe your version of rejection came through family, through partners, through systems that were supposed to protect you, but didn't. If so, I want you to hear this. You are not broken for being hurt. You are not too much for wanting to be chosen. And you are allowed to stop trying to earn love that should have been given freely. Overcoming rejection isn't about never feeling it again. It's about not letting it define you. It's learning to choose yourself in the places where others didn't. It's giving yourself the love, the protection, and the validation you were taught to wait for from someone else. Let this be the reminder. Choose love. Always choose love. And let it start with your own self-love. As always, thank you for listening. And if you made it this far, I appreciate you. I'll see you next time.